This week, Germany is to take another step towards strengthening its military in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The government's expected to agree on a model for reintroducing military service as part of plans to expand its armed forces, the Bundeswehr, which currently stands at around 180,000 active service personnel. Now, the move comes amid a broader modernisation drive backed by major new investment. Well, today, Germany marked the 70th anniversary of the re-establishment of its armed forces, a decade after the end of the Second World War. The occasion was celebrated with a ceremonial swearing-in of hundreds of new troops outside the Chancellor's office in central Berlin. Well, debate continues in Parliament about the sort of military service Germany will introduce to boost troop numbers to required levels. Here's Defence Minister Boris Pistorius.
We must strengthen our ability to deter and defend, now, decisively and without hesitation, because no one else will do it for us. That's why we are consistently aligning the Bundeswehr with national and alliance defence. That's why we're working hard to further improve its equipment and infrastructure. And last but not least, that's why we need the new military service.
Let's get more on this with German defence and security policy journalist Thomas Wiegold. Welcome to DW, Thomas. It's been 3.5 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine provoked this rethink of defence strategy here in Germany. Why is it taking so long to decide to recruit more troops?
Well, the problem is the sheer number is not a German idea. It's just a consequence of NATO defense plans. And if you look at NATO as a whole, they have been pretty negligent when it came to the defense of the Baltic states, of Poland, and they drew up plans only in recent years. This year at the NATO summit, the formal defense plans were accepted by all NATO members, and now the figure of approximately 260,000 active troops is just a consequence of this.
Right, so this is prompted by NATO, not by the discussion here in Germany.
Exactly. Of course, the discussion in NATO is a consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Right. And what's the stated objective? If we focus in on Germany's part in the NATO's plans, what's the stated objective of this hope for a military expansion?
This is actually twofold. One is to increase the number of active troops from currently approximately 180,000 to 260,000, which is quite a number. And on the other hand, Germany wants to increase its reserve forces. Actually, there is at the moment it's approximately 50 to 60,000, and 200,000 troops are needed as reservists to be called on in case of war.
All right. And so this is the discussion that's going on in the German parliament at the moment. And it's interesting that Germany starts from a position in which compulsory military service for young men is still required by the Constitution, but that requirement has been suspended. But as I understand it, the current discussions are about more than just lifting that suspension.
Well, actually, we don't know at the moment because parties in the governing coalition haven't yet agreed on a formula how to proceed. We will see most probably a mandatory physical examination of all young men who might be eligible for conscription, but we don't see conscription yet. For the time being, the defense minister, Boris Pistorius, wants mostly to stick to a volunteer force, and it remains to be seen how long he can go on with this to reach the stated goal of 260,000 troops, while the main governing party, the Christian Democrats, insist on a law which states that mandatory service, mandatory conscription must come rather soon. So what comes out of this discussion, we will see most probably this week or next week.
Thank you for that. The German Defence Minister, Boris Pistorius, has complained this week that no country talks down its own military as much as Germany. Is that because the Bundeswehr is actually not very good?
No, it's not. It's because of Germany's past. The German population, so German society has a completely different stand to its own armed forces than other nations like France, the UK, or the US.
And tell us more about that.
Well, if you look at the role of German armed forces in the last century, we had World War I, we had World War II, and in both world wars started by Germany, German armed forces had a very inglorious, infamous role. While in countries like France or the UK, forces were understood as the forces which protected the population from this war. In Germany, they were the forces who were a major part of this war.
And I think it's worth outlining that just to illustrate to an international audience how deeply ingrained that scepticism of German military involvement is amongst the German population. So how is the conversation around expanding Germany's armed force numbers? How is that going across the country amongst the population?
Well, the German population in recent years, and especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has started to look at its own armed forces a bit differently. Before that, they were mostly seen as something that Germany luckily could reduce and wouldn't need except for overseas operations like Afghanistan or Mali. But the idea that there might be something like defending your own country or defending allies could come up again didn't just occur to the German society. And this is, of course, the German legacy where military after World War II was seen as a very suspicious undertaking.
Right. And so now that we're in this new era as the country re-examines its military role and the size of its armed forces, the Bundeswehr's problems are said to extend beyond just numbers. There have been questions about procurement, about modernisation and its state of readiness as well.
Well, in recent years, or you might even say in the last 20 or 30 years, the Bundeswehr had the problem of the lack of funding. This has changed since the so-called Zeitenwende. Money no longer is a problem. But even if you have enough money for your armed forces, this won't buy you your whole equipment overnight. It won't buy you complex weapon systems overnight because it takes time to manufacture those. And that's one of the main problems of the German armed forces. They want to increase the number of troops, they want to increase equipment, weapon systems, but both takes time. And the main problem from the point of view of NATO is there is no time if you want to build up a credible deterrence against a possible Russian threat.
That's very clear. Thank you for talking us through that, Thomas. German defence and security policy journalist Thomas Wiegold.
Welcome.